Okay, I want to welcome everyone. This is a new school year. This is the 2021-2022 school year, and this will be our first research forum for the Kimmons Wilson School. And today we have our very own Brian Sweeney with us, and he's here from Career Services. He is embedded within KWS, and he's here because him and I are going to discuss current trends happening within the main fields that are housed within our schools, sport, hospitality, and culinary. And then kind of go through some of those, the skill sets that people need. And then we'll finish with Brian talking about the different services that are offered through his office and also just offered on general main campus for people wanting to get into these type of fields. So first, Brian, I want to welcome you. And if you could quickly give us a rundown of your background, how you came to us, and how you chose to started to join the family at KWS. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and happy to be here. Happy to talk about these really important topics. So I have been within career services at the University of Memphis since November of 2019. So had a little bit of on-campus time before the pandemic changed everything. I have been in higher ed for the last about close to 5 years. I was at Northeastern University in Boston prior to relocating to Memphis, and where I got my master's in education. I had gotten my undergrad degree at Providence College in global studies, so a little all over the place in terms of what my educational background is, I suppose. But so I have, I've always been interested in learning by doing and learning through, work experiences, study abroad, experiential education. So that's sort of what brought me into this field in general. And this was kind of the perfect opportunity to, bring together that interest with the connection and interest in higher education and education in general. And so that's sort of in a nutshell what my background is and what brought me here.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting with an educational background in global studies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one, working in a school that the three main programs in the school are very globalized.
Absolutely.
Definitely helps to have someone of your caliber and your background. And then also, just as you mentioned, the world has changed, and change has sped up because of what we're going through right now. And so we are a much more globalized society. So having that background is very interesting and extremely helpful to our students as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it. Every industry, I think, has been on the trajectory of becoming more, or I guess less bound by time zones and borders in terms of where business is being done and how people are interacting, and that just sort of skyrocketed in the last year.
Yeah, and so the main content that we talked about, we discussed for this forum, is to have you kind of walk us through what are some of the main employment trends, not necessarily specific jobs or positions, but employment trends that you have seen from your perspective in our three main programs: hospitality, sport, and culinary. So if I'll just turn the floor over to you for a little bit and chime in every once in a while with questions. Yeah. If maybe we could start with hospitality, go to sport, then go to culinary. And I'm sure there's some overlap between all of those three as well, but please take it away.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the overarching trend, and it won't be a surprise to anyone, is just how much the pandemic has, either created new trends or exacerbated existing ones, or in some cases changed things drastically. So, hospitality is inarguably one of the industries most affected by changes required by the pandemic. It's tough to, go stay in a hotel in another place when travel is really limited or really discouraged at the very least. So I think, now as those traveling is sort of increasing again, a lot of the things that came about during the pandemic, I do think are still going to stay, at least in some ways. Of course, enhanced and increased hygiene protocols were a huge, not to say pretty much every hotel, I'm sure, already had sterling, cleanliness protocols and what they did to maintain hygiene. But I think consumers in general want to be made more aware of what's being done in that regard. So I think it's going to continue as people are just more conscious about it, even if they are, even if one day, hopefully soon, the pandemic is less front of mind. I do still think that's going to be important for consumers, is knowing what the hotel that they're staying at has done to encourage, or to guarantee the cleanliness of the room where they're staying. And especially if people are traveling, on vacation from out of town or anything like that, they don't want that to be front of mind concern when they're on vacation, for example. So, having clear descriptions of what those policies are is going to be, I think, something you see at any in most hotels and resorts going forward. And I think that'll really affect, from the worker side of things, that's going to be an important part, regardless of what role within a hotel or resort somebody has. If they're, even setting aside somebody, even say you're not working in housekeeping, but you're the front desk manager, or you're doing sales over the phone or over email or anything like that. Those are going to be questions you'll be fielding a lot, is what are you doing to ensure I'll be safe while I'm there, from a cleanliness perspective and a hygiene and infectious disease perspective. So I think that's something that'll continue for sure. Another thing that I think, will be interesting to see if it continues is, during the pandemic, there was an increase in longer term stays as travel was limited. So a lot of times people who were traveling wanted to make the most of the time they had. And especially if they were in a position where they could work remotely, a lot of people, were traveling somewhere and maybe not really being on vacation, so to speak, but just working from a new location and staying there for an extended period of time. And I think, as it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years, but we're already seeing a lot of companies in other sectors allow employees to have a remote or hybrid or flexible working model. So, my guess and what I'm thinking is that there will continue to be people, especially, younger people, maybe folks who don't have kids or families necessarily, who may continue to do those longer stays, travel somewhere while also working. Just anecdotally, I know, people who did that a lot throughout the last year, and that's something that had already been going on a bit, where people who were in remote jobs, there's a term digital nomad, which is somebody who can work from anywhere and travels around the world while still working while doing it. And I think that's going to stay and just increase. So what'll be interesting is how, hotels, resorts, any sorts of accommodation companies respond to that. Will there be new types of protocols put in place for those longer term stays? Will there be, I just, and how that affects the worker, I think is interesting because, it changes the way uh, hotels are marketed, changes the way accommodations are marketed, because if more people are expecting to stay somewhere for a longer period of time, what other amenities is the hotel offering, or is the accommodation offering to create more financial gain for the institution?
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see what comes of that, but I do think that's something that will likely continue.
Well, and if I could jump in real quick on that
Please.
one, I think the over the last 18 months, I've read several times of different hotels and resorts. They were offering, like, for kids who were doing virtual learning, that you could go and they would have a place where the kids could do their virtual learning while staying at the hotel. And what you said about being that digital nomad brings up a really interesting question for me, that both being a digital nomad or traveling with kids who are doing some type of virtual learning, do you think we will see kind of an increase in business centers on properties, or because of the nature of what we're going through right now, where people are not supposed to gather in large numbers, you're supposed to practice social distancing? Do you think the trend would actually go away from that, and properties now having to offer kind of increased internet speed and increased accessibility for people so that they can work either from their rooms or their balconies, or maybe from, their outside terraces or something like that? How do you think that's going to impact us moving forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I honestly think the answer may be both. I think people are, especially when distancing and, the idea of sharing electronics, sharing a computer or something like that is probably not not something people are super interested in. And, if folks are traveling for work, they likely have their own, technology to help them do that. But I do think, if hotels are going to increase as a place where people are, both vacationing and working, or staying and working, I definitely think things like increased internet speed and, reservable small rooms or conference rooms, there's been a trend in hostels and in co-working spaces kind of merging a little bit. And I think you could see that maybe even in a more traditional hotel type model, where there is still that capability of to treat it almost as if you're in a co-working environment. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And so many of these trends and changes are both informed by COVID, and will be interesting to see how they morph after, when COVID is hopefully soon not as much of a day-to-day concern as it is currently. So I'm not 100% sure, but I do think both is certainly possible. So some other sort of trends within hospitality that I've seen, I think, in kind of going along with the longer stays, things like, alternative things kind of considered alternative accommodations, Airbnbs, longer term house rentals, and even things like glamping or hostels are only going to become more popular and more mainstream. There's also, I think, a rise in more experiential stays. So there are things like treehouse rental, cottages, or, staying at a working farm in, I think there's one in, I can't remember the name of it now, in Eastern Tennessee. But anyway, I think these things are going to become, continue to grow. I mean,
Okay.
Airbnb is as known a name as basically any brand now. And so I think, for folks hoping to go into that industry, I think it's going to, into hospitality, I think it's going to require a more openness, not necessarily that they didn't have it before, but an increased openness in what your future career path might look like, openness to exploring other options outside of, what you might expect doing. There's always going to be the need for larger hotels, of course, and those I don't think are going away. But I do think these alternatives are just going to increase more and more. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, and I think it's within hospitality, I think it's an interesting thing to consider alongside the hygiene protocols, is an increased focus on sustainable practices within and green, environmentally friendly practices within hotels. They've been moving in that direction for a long time, and I think consumers are more and more conscious of wanting to decrease their carbon footprint. And we've all seen the sign in a hotel that says, to save water or save energy, reuse your towels, or don't have us change the sheets. I think things outside of that will only continue. The area where there's sort of an asterisk on that is a lot of hygiene protocols related to COVID that we've seen both in restaurants, in hotels, and basically everywhere, may require less sustainable practices in the short term. I mean, you think about, I was at a restaurant that is giving prepackaged utensils with every meal, where they definitely didn't do that before. And so that type of thing is maybe not green, but I think more larger scale practices will definitely occur. And I think, for somebody working there, it'll be something not only that they have to integrate into their lives in work, but there may be an opportunity for, new roles within hotels and organizations to integrate the more sustainable practices. So I think that's something that's a trend that's been going on for a long time that I think is certainly only going to continue.
Okay. All right. And what do you see as far as some of the emerging trends within the sport industry right now for people who are wanting to get in, including things that are kind of carrying over into all three different areas?
Yeah, definitely. So some of the things I've seen, I think, of the areas, of the three areas, sport has likely the most possibility of people continuing to be in remote and hybrid work, not necessarily if they're working for a team or a large organization, but there's a huge rise in sports marketing jobs. That's one of the within marketing jobs, that's one of the areas that's really fast growing. And I think it's because it's something that is more flexible on location. It's something that, in general, sports industry jobs are growing. And I think so it's natural that a field that is growing in and of itself would have marketing jobs that are growing. And the obvious answer with anything with marketing is the growth and diversification of different mediums that marketing occurs, whether it's different social media platforms or more multifaceted email and phone and again social media marketing. That's only growing, and so that's a really promising area, I think. And similarly, like we were talking about before, the increased globalization of the sport industries lends itself well to any job within sport, but especially marketing, where not only are you marketing jobs potentially, say you're working for a firm that is representing a team in the US, it's likely that that firm will also need to handle overseas marketing. And how do you market to different demographics who are, maybe tune in to watch a sport in a different way than somebody in the US. So I think that'll be interesting. Just a quick side plug: we do have a sports marketing association within Cummins Wilson. So if anyone's interested in that, you can join on Tiger Zone. We're going to be sending out information about starting out for this semester soon. So, but yeah, so I think there is going to be more flexibility in where and how people work. And it'll also be interesting to see, I think, I think as an impact of COVID, there was more virtual fan experiences and more requirements for plans B, C, D for sports organizations to respond to, the inability to have fans attending games. So the opportunity there to create new ways that fans can get connected with a team or a player or an organization at large, there's a lot of opportunity there. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. And one trend that I didn't mention on hospitality, but I think it's true there and is true in sport and culinary, is a steady, a continued desire from more people to get involved in entrepreneurship and sort of being their own boss. I think in some ways the pandemic increased those trends when people, if people were laid off from a job or had trouble getting a job because of the pandemic, people are persevering and finding, having the opportunity to pursue being their own boss and starting their own business, I think is tapping into something that they may have already wanted to do. But there's a lot of room for it, and I think that's an area that within all three of these industries is going to really continue to grow.
Okay.
And okay.
Well, I feel like it's really interesting with all three areas of hospitality, culinary, and sport really do rely on people. I guess the end game is to get consumers to a specific place, either a hotel, a culinary experience, or a sporting event. And I know you mentioned that sport does pose probably the biggest opportunity to work remotely. One thing that's been interesting to me over these last 18 months is, will the sport industry go back to the fact that we need people in stadiums and venues, or if they are going to embrace this new kind of digital engagement and different ways to engage, then are those negotiations or the strategy change toward less live attendance and more toward the mediated attendance? And so what's been really interesting to me to think about is, where are we going to go and what are we going to start seeing with like contract negotiations with media rights and everything moving forward? Because I think one thing that has happened because of the pandemic is, I think a lot of people have, they were almost forced to realize that they could consume these products at home, and what type of impact. Most people would probably think negative impact on live attendance, but will it have a negative impact, or is there a way to make it some sort of positive impact on organizations in the sport industry? moving forward. I wanted to throw that in there because that's something
Yeah,
that I've been thinking a lot of recently.
definitely. And I think it's a similar trend in a few industries. The film industry is definitely dealing with that as well, where you know, people, a lot of companies like, big companies like Disney and Warner Brothers are doing this day and date
Mhm.
thing where movies are coming out in theaters and for an extra fee at home. And how is that impacting theaters? But I think one thing that's different in sport is that more than more than pretty much any industry, people recognize what they were missing in not being
Yeah.
able to go to a sporting event. And I don't, and I, the things I feel like just anecdotally I heard the most from people in the last year was I missed going to sporting events and I missed going to concerts
Mhm.
as two things that were sort of things that you really can't capture at home. It's great to watch any game on TV, but it's not necessarily the same
Yeah.
as going
Yeah.
there, of course. And I do think that's something that people recognized missing. And I personally, I don't think that is going to go away. But I do think, there will continue to be, and I think things that came out of necessity during the pandemic to increase those virtual fan engagements will likely stay. But I do think the and hope, as somebody who enjoys going to in-person events, that those will continue to be the focus. But I do think it would be beneficial for organizations to continue highlighting those virtual opportunities as well, especially as industries and fans are all over the world. And so,
Yeah.
if I'm, if I'm a fan of a team who's in the Premier League in the UK, and I, not really going to be able to watch them in person, or their games are at like 6 a.m. here, more ways that I can feel connected to that team is going to be, I think a beneficial way to increase, fandom and revenue for those organizations. But I think it's a really complicated, and as you were describing the issue, it's multifaceted, because it deals with things like everything from media rights to player contracts and things like that. And so it'll be interesting, I think, to see what comes out. But I don't think live sporting events are going away.
Yeah, I mean, I think the communal experience that you have when you go to a sporting event, a theme park, concerts, different entertainment venues, that may, to me, it seems like that may take a little bit longer for everybody to kind of figure out how that's going to look, because we are still in a position where there are still a lot of restrictions placed on those types of gatherings. So moving forward, it's that balance of how do you engage people digitally and remotely, and then how do you also attract people to feeling comfortable to go out again, which kind of goes back to your first point when you were talking about hospitality, just the cleanliness and kind of that the increased expectations now that people have. What else have you seen in the sport industry as far as trends?
One thing I thought was really interesting, and I think it touches on just a overarching growth within the industry, is how high the expected growth rate is for coaching and scouting positions. The national average, I pulled this up because I was so pleasantly surprised and kind of impressed by the number. But the national average for growth in any job is 4%, and for coaching and scouting it's 12% from 2019 to 2029. That's the expected growth rate. So that's pretty exciting. And I think for a lot of people who are drawn to sport, it's because either they played sports and really loved it and wanted to work in that industry, or grew up watching sports and loving it that way. And I know, just anecdotally from speaking with students, many who want to get involved in that sort of capacity as a coach or a potential scout. So I think, and as opposed to most of the other stuff we've been talking about, I don't see that necessarily as something tied to the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I don't also see that as something affected negatively by the pandemic. I think as that industry, as opportunities continue to come about, I do think, that's a really exciting route for a lot of folks wanting to break in, because there are just, there's going to be a steady increase in opportunity. And if you're somebody who, something that I've seen this past year is there's a lot of push from a lot of people who want to continue working, want to work in a remote or a hybrid job. But if you're somebody who wants that more hands-on experience and things like that, coaching is going to be something pretty tough to move to a remote job. But, something like a scout is already in some ways a bit of a hybrid job, where you're maybe traveling a lot, maybe working in, different environments. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So it'll be exciting to see what comes of that, for sure.
Yeah, very.
And then I think in general, as the sports industry has continued to grow, there will be things like esports becoming more and more popular in mainstream. I think, and that's another sport that is really global by design, and so the opportunity for jobs outside of maybe what one expects joining a studying sport, I think they're just going to be continue to be more avenues and opportunities that are not really expected.
Yeah, definitely. So then let's talk about culinary.
Yeah.
And culinary experiences. And this seems, from my perspective, to be one that has been hit extremely hard, and that I don't mean as far as the people attending or go into restaurants and everything, but the impact on the culinary industry seems to be very significant. From, if you look at the beginning of the pandemic, when a large swath of the United States, and there are portions of the world that are still under different lockdown measures, that you had restaurants having to, on the fly, learn how to go from serving people in the restaurant to now preparing and for people to take things home, and actually not having people in restaurants when restaurants open back up. How did they have to kind of, work with the social distancing requirements and the sanitary requirements? So it's a very interesting area to me as far as kind of how it has been impacted. What have you seen as far as trends moving forward for people who are interested in that industry?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. Not only is it, I think we saw in the last 18 months a number of different forms of adaptation that restaurants had to take to respond to their situation. So as you said, it was going from just mostly being in person, and of course pretty much every restaurant already did to-go orders, but that in person being so much of the focus, to not being able to do that at all, and switching entirely to more off-premises dining, be it in a delivery app or having their own internal delivery system, to then, like you said, restaurants reopening, but also the outdoor dining element was such a big thing. It's tough to think about that a ton in how hot it's been here this past week. But my sister lives in New York and in the city, and she was saying how interesting it's been, just how many restaurants have these basically taking over the sidewalk or like a parking spot on the street to have patios and stuff. And how many of them seem to want to just keep that as an option. And I think, that gets into the hesitation or reluctance to be in close confined spaces with other people that continues even after, even in stretches where rates were really low and people were getting vaccinated. So I think those are things that'll stay. And I mentioned the delivery apps, the off-premises dining. I think those were already big. Things like Grubhub and Uber Eats, all of those different platforms were already really big prior to the pandemic. But when they increased significantly during, and the contactless ordering and payment options, I think is going to be something that people are interested in continuing to have, because you get, like we were talking about earlier with cleanliness in a hotel. If you think, you maybe didn't think too much about who is handling your food from when it was being made to when it got to you. But if a consumer is maybe thinking about that a lot more now, even if they're not as concerned about COVID. So I think that's something that's going to stick around. What's really interesting though is one thing that I've read is that consumers on the whole, while they use apps like Grubhub and DoorDash or all of those, tend to prefer ordering through a restaurant's site or over the phone, or even you'll see restaurants have their own app to order from. So I think we're going to see a lot of restaurants continue to put an emphasis on that, whether it's ensuring their online ordering system works really well, or if they have their own delivery system in place. So I do think that's going to continue. But it presents a number of interesting challenges. And I think, this past year, the folks anybody who was working in a job where they had to be present and be around other people a lot was put in, potentially scary situations all the time. And I think, one of my hopes is that people are recognizing that, and the responses from, both the restaurant industry and the government and restaurant owners and all of that stuff will be to, ensure the safety of people in these positions as best they can. So, but I do think to get back to your original question, I think, that the continual sort of perseverance and adaptation of what a restaurant looks like and how they complete orders and work with customers is going to continue to evolve and be flexible. And I do think, off-premises dining, be it at home or taking to-go orders and sitting outside somewhere, anything like that, I do think is going to continue. And I think entrepreneurship, I mentioned before, is an area that there was a rise in home cooks creating products over this past year, where people, there was that phase early on in the pandemic where it seemed like everybody was making sourdough bread, but there were some people who, and this again extends out well outside of culinary, but had maybe always had a knack for doing something, had a little bit more time, or maybe was working from home when they hadn't been before, and took that opportunity and ran with it. And so I do think that'll continue. And one thing that has been true, and I think is true now and will continue to be, is there's a continued integration of innovative technology that restaurants are trying to use, and in some ways that looks like increasing automation in kitchens, which I know is a scary thing for a lot of people, but I think it is something that restaurants are looking to, especially when so many of their finances were hit so hard this past year by decreased revenue. So but I think something that I'm hopeful continues that we saw, especially early on in the pandemic, but I think throughout, was consumers really putting their money to businesses that they wanted to support, be it local restaurants who were hit hard, or especially in June and late May and June of last year, restaurants run by people of color who were negatively impacted by racist events and attacks in communities around the country. So there's a lot written about an increase in consumers using money to support businesses. So I think my hope is that will continue, even keeping in mind the financial strain that a lot of consumers and restaurants are under.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's really interesting to look at moving forward. How early on during the pandemic, there was like this public support of what we termed essential workers.
Right.
And it would be nice to see that return now and carry forward the way that people treat different people in each one of these industries, especially like service industries, that, because it literally was, when everybody was under lockdown measures, they were some of the few people who were asked to go out and kind of keep things running for a good number of months. So yeah, I think that's something that's very important. I'm glad you brought that up, because it is a very important thing to look at moving forward, how treatment of employees, both from corporations' perspectives, but also from consumers' perspectives, how that's going to look moving forward as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's something that's very, very important, and I'm hopeful that, as you said, we deemed people essential workers, and I think even it's important that we recognize them being essential, even if we are going back to restaurants that we had before.
Just, I mean, the fact that the fact that the people don't have to stay at home, or I guess maybe that issue is taken away, doesn't change the fact that the people are still essential. The people who are out there doing this. So do you have anything else on the culinary side?
Yeah, so I think one other thing I wanted to mention is, I think an opportunity for, so there's been an increase, and this is again something that predates the pandemic, but I think for a certain demographic continued and happened more, was there's an increased interest in sort of more individualized and unique dining experiences, and that extends to hospitality as a whole. But I think that's a real opportunity for entrepreneurs. For folks, it's not something that is very affordable often for the consumer, but for folks who can afford to do it, having sort of they're often called like a chef's table type experience, where you and maybe a small bubble, a small group of people are getting prepared a really incredible meal, and having that as sort of a more intimate experience is something that has been on the rise. And I think that creates an opportunity for entrepreneurial endeavors if you're somebody who is good at is able to get your name out there as a chef and promoting your work. It's not it's competitive, and it's not something that is available for everyone to consume necessarily, but it's an interesting thing, and I do wonder if I do think that more individualized experiences like that will continue to occur, and continue to grow as people have learned about it, experienced it. And again, that was something that predates the pandemic, but I do see that sticking around.
Okay. All right. So then to bring the three together, what transferable skills have you seen or do you think are needed for our students and for people wanting to get into and continue in these industries at this point moving forward?
Yeah, well, so something you mentioned earlier was, in some way, that one of the unifying things between these three is the desire to get people to a place to participate in something, whether it be a vacation or a stay at a hotel, a meal, attending a sporting event. And so all of that does ultimately come back to interpersonal and customer service skills. So, and customer service can mean a lot of different things depending on the industry and the role. But I think if we think about, interpersonal skills as the sort of number one, I think, necessity, building rapport and building relationships with people, being helpful and clear in your communication, and just being a friendly face to somebody when they're interested in something or want to learn more about something. If you are working at a restaurant, it's great to get somebody in the door and have them dine there once, but you want to have that really strong customer service to make them a repeat customer, somebody who comes there regularly or every time on a special occasion. And I think that's true in sport and in hospitality as well. You want, whether their team wins or loses, you want them to want to come back time and time again to see them play. And so
you definitely want to take care of the people who define the 80-20 rule as far as your loyal customers. And one thing and this was, it was moving this way pre-pandemic, but especially during the pandemic, when there's not a lot of personal, or what I mean, face-to-face interaction, how can people still have and hone those personal skills where they're able to interact with people? And one thing in particular I'm thinking is, now with just the ever growing popularity of doing things on social media and doing things online, how can a person maintain and even grow that kind of sense of personal touch that could keep people coming back to their products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is something that's tough, both from that decreased face-to-face interaction, and also the fact that most of our face-to-face interactions are like this for the last year, where you can't really, get a full picture of somebody's expression. And so it is challenging. And even personally, I feel like it's been an adjustment back into having face-to-face conversations with people, remembering how to make small talk and have those conversations. So, I think it's an area that's challenging for sure. I do think you can still build those skills even in a virtual environment. If you're in a virtual class that has regular Zoom meetings, or even optional ones, taking advantage of those and just actually participating is a good idea. Not even as an aside, I think you can get more out of the class by doing that, by participating, which I know preaching to the choir here, but and I think not just having your camera off and on mute, like actually engaging and interacting that way is a way that you can do that.
Okay.
And if it's a class that's meeting asynchronously, if there's a discussion board and you have an exam coming up, meeting virtually to prepare or practice, studying or anything like that is a way to do it. And then, that transition back to in person is challenging. If you have people that are kind of in your bubble, if it's you have a roommate, making time to talk with them, even if you've been spending more time apart or more time separated. I think it's just it's a challenge, but making time to take advantage of any opportunity you can to interact with other people. But also, I do think there's an increased understanding that people are struggling in that regard. So, but I do also believe that, there is a need to create that, connection, or at least have a really good first impression more quickly now, because people are likely spending less time interacting with other people. So, having that really good first conversation starting point is a good idea.
Well, and I think that's extremely important also, because what we are going through is a traumatic experience for many. And so it also, over these last 18 months, like it also helps to you're honing your skills, but you're also doing something for the greater good, sometimes by just checking on people and checking where people's, people are in their headspace and everything right now, because we are in a different situation.
Absolutely.
What other transferable skills have you seen that are important?
Yeah, I think an adaptability and sort of a flexibility and an openness to ambiguity are all things that are really important. That's true in a lot of industries, but I think particularly, we were talking about it with Culinary before, how the nature of restaurants changed, 3 or 4 times during the pandemic, and probably more than that. And so a willingness to sort of, not just go with the flow, but be willing to pivot as needed is important. And, I think, what relates to that is perseverance, which is it can be, this year has, really beaten down people. And as you said, it's essentially a traumatic event for pretty much everyone. So, the need to persevere and kind of continue to fight through that is important. But I think sometimes people wrongly think of perseverance just as, fighting through it no matter what, when I think it's actually being conscious of, yourself and how you're doing, so you can, continue moving on and getting through the challenges that you have. So those are all, really important transferable skills. I think really strong organizational skills are really important in all three. I think it's maybe most, it maybe is a given that that's an important skill to have. But if you're somebody working with a lot of different customers, it can be hard to keep that all straight if you're not clearly organized. So, if you're somebody working in hospitality and you want to make it a priority to remember those regular regular visitors, or, anything along those lines, keeping yourself organized and and keeping track of who you interact with and what your schedule is like and all that stuff is going to be really important.
So then to kind of sum up what we're doing here today, can you tell the students briefly what services your office provides, and also, even outside of career services, what is available to students on campus to help them prepare for moving into these industries?
Definitely. So, as in a general kind of summation of what we do, we kind of help with, we like to say our job is to help you get a job. So it's everything from figuring out what it is you want to do, figure out, your career path. We if students are kind of unsure about majors or what they can do with the major that they're pursuing, we can help with that. We help with resume building, mock interviews, which we can tailor to a particular job. We do a lot of different events on campus, including we have our campus-wide career fairs coming up on September 22nd, where we'll have a bunch of employers coming. Students, if you haven't heard about this already, you probably have, but if you haven't, you'll get a lot more information about it soon. But essentially, we kind of try to help students every step of the way, from figuring out what they want to do to helping them do it. So, job and internship search help and grad school planning, if that's something students are interested in. So those are a lot of the things within our office. Outside of our office, there are so many ways to build skills and gain experience outside of the classroom and outside of a job on campus, and connected with the university. Student organizations are a really great way to build skills and connect with other people, regardless of what you're interested in. There's likely a student organization that connects to that interest. So starting off by attending meetings, this is also a really great way to meet people and practice those communication skills and interpersonal skills. But maybe someday holding a leadership position within a student organization, or even just getting involved and helping that organization engage in its regular activities and do what they are trying to do. Even participating, I mentioned this before, but participating in class and asking questions and being involved within Cummins Wilson and within your program is a really great way to have continual opportunities to learn. I think instructors and professors always appreciate it when a student is clearly interested in learning. So showing that to professors is super important. And looking into, I think, staying aware of different things that are going on campus. Trying to not just what assignments you have or when your next exam is, but what are ways that you can be involved in the U of M through the student organizations or through volunteering in the community, which you can do as a student through the school, looking at ways to get connected. All of those are good things that can help you build skills and potentially be put on your resume to kind of help strengthen any application that you have.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because a university exists for the purpose of educating and fostering education and fostering growth within people. And there are so many learning opportunities outside of just those that you get credit for, that so it's a very, very important role that the university plays in both students' lives and in our communities that we're located as well. When I want to ask if you have any final thoughts on what students should look for, kind of words of wisdom for students moving forward, and then also if you could just let people know the best way to reach you, whether that's email or whatever, for follow-up questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in summation, there's a lot of exciting, so much of the change that has happened in the last year and a half has been scary. And I know a lot of it continues to be scary. But I do think there are some, good changes that are going on, some in response to the pandemic, necessary changes that had maybe already been in place. So I think it's a scary time, of sure, but there is still a lot to be excited about and be interested in and learn more about. So all three of these industries have a lot of really exciting things happening in them, even in spite of all of that. So I encourage people to stay aware of what's going on in your industries, because it's the best way to learn about, types of jobs that you could potentially have that you maybe don't know about, or ways to build skills that you don't already know about. So, I think taking the time to develop those transferable skills, the things you can get outside of working at a job in your industry, is going to be a great way to enhance your educational experience, make you a better applicant for jobs in the future, and just help you be more well-rounded, and everything like that. So email is a great way to get in touch with me. My email it's almost B Sweeney, it's B Sweeney. It is missing that second E. It's bsweeney3@memphis.edu. But the other option is, if you want to set up an appointment to meet with me, we use this platform Handshake, which is basically platform for everything related to career services here. It's also called TigerLink. It's TigerLink powered by Handshake, I should say, is the full title. But if you go to memphis.joinhandshake.com, you log in with your U of M credentials, you'll see me under Career Center, and you can set up an appointment to meet with me about any of the things I talked about or any other stuff. So I meet with students all the time for everything from resume reviewing to concerns about what to do with your major when you graduate, or practicing for an interview or anything like that. So would love to talk to anyone with any questions that they have. If you have questions about anything we talked about, definitely feel free to email me or set up an appointment to talk with me about it too.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Brian, and walking us through the important trends you've seen, the transferable skills that are important, and just giving us more information on how people can prepare themselves for moving forward and working in these industries. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.